teams on college campuses that can help facilitate like the communication among key people on campuses like law enforcement, counseling staff, disability support staff, administrative staff, faculty members, where hopefully when there's this concern regarding a student, additional information can be gathered, and rather than a punitive approach, they can intervene, and hopefully a supportive approach would be the goal, and offer that student, whatever support and services they might need. Of course, there are probably those situations where, there needs to be an intervention where the student be removed from the campus. Actually, our university here at JSU, we do have a behavioral concerns team that is charged with that role. Most college campuses have that sort of team. It may be called different things, students of concern committee, threat assessment committee, but the role is basically the same. And that is actually a law in Virginia that every college and university, have that team in place.
But what if it's an instance where, because, craziness or social awkwardness is ambiguous. It's in the eyes of the beholder. It's what you think that person is weird, or that person doesn't fit your social criteria of normalness or consistency. Is there any, how do you kind of get around that idea of, oh, this person is weird, or maybe that person could just simply just be different than you? And how do you tell the difference?
Well, I think we all know that college campuses are full of people that are unique or different or come from various backgrounds and perspectives. So I think the key is gathering as much information as possible from anyone in that campus community that might have information about that individual, whether it be housing staff or faculty members or counseling staff or anybody that, law enforcement, I think that's the key, is really increasing those lines of communication to help that student, hopefully, and protect the university community.
One thing, and now I want to take this over to Dr. Tim Barnett. Dr. Tim Barnett holds a PhD in political science. Dr. Barnett, is there really any way to, speaking in terms of government or speaking in terms of legality, is there really any way to legally circumvent someone from doing something if they really have no proof? Because it seems that in every single instance, for instance, the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting that occurred on December 14th, they described the shooter, Adam Lanza, they described him as, quote, intelligent but nervous and fidgety. He avoided attracting attention and was uncomfortable socializing. They also said that he was, quote unquote, somewhat autistic, but they say that autism is more so a brain-related developmental problem, not a mental illness that will cause someone to go into a building and kill dozens of people. Is there any way from a government perspective to legally intervene into someone's life and say, something is not right about you, you may do something to harm someone? Just kind of give us a perspective on that.
Well, that's a big question. I'd like to put it in the context of just our historical experience here in the United States. If we look back to 1963, the year that President Kennedy was shot, we had a relatively low level of violence in our society at that time. Then as we got into the mid-60s, things began to change. We went on a run from the early 60s until the early 90s, in which we doubled our rate of homicides, aggravated assaults, rapes, robberies went up 3 to 5-fold, and now we have seen the murder rate return to the 1963 level. But these other forms of violence have not come down that much yet. Well, in 1966, there was a catalytic event. It was the University of Texas Austin Massacre, in which a young man got up to a vantage point and for an hour and a half shot people, killed 16, wounded 31. And that shooting was the worst that we had had in our country that was just massacre style. at least to my knowledge. And it touched off a lot of public questions like the one that you've just raised. What can we do about this situation? Can we identify a potential shooter? And as a result, we commissioned various studies. The most significant publication that came out of that was in 1969 by Hugh Davis Graham, called The History of Violence in America, a report to the National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence. Now, while that book is hard to come by at bookstores, it is available online. You can go to Google Books and actually read in that. It's an 800-page text. But to bottom line it, the conclusion at that time was that we couldn't do nearly enough to change things because we would be invading people's rights, their civil liberties, things that America had fought for a long time. And so it was thought that we would have to find ways through our communities and civic institutions to try to encourage, development of responsible behaviors. So in sum, I don't know of any way, really, that we can do that without, at least in many Americans' minds, the costs, outweighing the potential benefits. Maybe I could make one other comment here. We lose 33,000 people a year in automobile accidents. And 1/3 of these accidents, alcohol figures in at a level of a BAC of 0.08 or higher. And so that's 11,000 deaths a year, alcohol-related, in automobile accidents. And that's the number of our homicides in the United States, gun-related, firearm-based homicides. And so a lot of people are killed in a lot of different ways, and many Americans are just not ready yet to say that we can get too far into people's private lives without taking away other things that Americans hold dear, namely a lot of their privacy. Now, I have second thoughts about where we should draw those lines, and maybe we need to do more. But at least in times past, I don't think that the answers have been apparent.
Let's kind of switch gears here for a minute. I want to go to Mr. David E. Reddick. David, not only is the NAACP chapter president, but David also has a long background, a long history, excuse me, in civil rights as well. David, what Dr. Barnett just said in regards to kind of intervening or going into people's kind of private or personal lives, as a person who has a background in civil rights, do you think that is a civil rights issue to come into someone's life and I guess kind of circumvent whatever tragedy or whatever massacre that may occur?
Well, you see, there's always going to be that fine line. There's always going to be that, at what point am I, do I invade people's liberties or their ability to make their own choices or their privacy? And at what point is it the safety of the people, of the citizenship? So you're always going to have that line in the sand, and it's always a touchy point for the government to really go into those kind of things. When we have catastrophic events such as 9/11, after 9/11, the government was able to step over a whole lot of boundaries that previously was taboo. They could not go into that, and they would have never got the support. So after catastrophic events, then people are much more willing to give up some of their liberties. But until we get to a point to where the citizenship is saying, okay, we'll give up this amount of our independence or our self-time or what we have, our privacy, until the citizenship say this is how much privacy we're willing to give up to have, in the utopia of safety, it's always going to be that issue.
I want to say, Sean Creech, you've had to go to people's houses and you've had to go to teenagers' homes and you've had to see, something here isn't right. At what point are you what point are you legally required to alert authorities or to alert the police that something about this particular family or something about this family tells me that they are at risk to the public?
Well, as a social worker, I'm a mandatory reporter. And so by law, if I feel that there's certain aspects where somebody's going to be harmed, then I have a duty to warn. And, it was regular practice that if we felt that somebody's life was at risk, then law enforcement was notified, and most of the time law enforcement was with us as we were going into these homes and conducting these assessments.
And even too, I want to direct it over here to our ministers, Pastor Fred Smith and Minister Michael Walker. Both of you all are men who work in the church. You know, you have people who come to you and who talk to you about their problems, I'm sure. And even though you do what people say spiritual counseling, you spiritually counsel people, and you teach them how to deal with problems in their life. Have you all ever encountered a situation where someone has come to you and maybe come into your office or maybe come into your presence and given you some information that was a little scary?
I think it's an answer to it is yes. And when you say scary, I would kind of frame the question or kind of reframe the answer in not scary to the point of causing bodily harm to another person, but scary in the point of asking myself the question, where could this now lead? What would be this person's next step in their lives? I think one of the things we look at when we're dealing with this whole issue is we have to, and from a spiritual standpoint, we have to make recognition that what we're seeing in our societies are not just a result of anger, and it's not just a result of wrong choices. It's also a result of a spiritual climate that has developed in our nation and around the world that's a result of our choices and a result of our spirituality. So the dark side to what we are experiencing in our nation is a side that we have to ask ourselves, who really has the answer for what we're going through and for what we're seeing in our communities and our societies. At some point in time, years ago, we were able to pass the buck and kind of frame violence to types of communities. You know, we said that violence was only something that you saw in low-income communities. We said that violence was something that you only saw in communities where people were not motivated, where people were not working. Well, you know, that frame has totally gone away now, and we see that violence is being seen in everybody's community, no matter the education level, no matter what school they go to, no matter their pedigree, or no matter what degree they have. We see violence has now become something that is epidemic in our society. So we have to ask the question, what is and who is the real answer? Because we've done a lot of diagnosing, but we've not been able to come up with a solution. And so that's the question we wanted to stop. How does it stop? And this is a great way with this forum tonight of being able to talk about some of the systemic roots that are pervasive among some of these shootings that we've seen. So to also just to pass the mic, one of the things that I've noticed is there's always some level of similarity. I'll draw a reference for you, and the reference I'll draw, a spiritual reference I'll draw, is from the first act of violence that we have recorded in human history. The first act of violence we have recorded in human history was actually a murder. And we take that all the way back to Genesis, the 4th chapter, where we see, it's very familiar, a story where Cain killed Abel. Now, even we can learn a whole lot from this story and what drove Cain to kill Abel just by going back and reading the story. It's still apropos till today. We look at there was feelings of insecurity, there were feelings of inferiority, there were feelings that he did not match up to what was quote unquote the standard of being a legitimate, accepted person in his community, and for the sake of this story, by God. So when we look at that, you know, a lot of people know about that story, but a lot of people don't know about the second murder in the Bible. The second murder in the Bible comes as a result of a descendant of Cain, and his name is Lamech. And this gentleman committed murder. And here's the thing that is so interesting about that: as he commits murder, he then draws a reference back to Cain. So what we see here now is, however Lamech